Hello everyone and welcome back to another exciting video from Economy Expert. In this video today, we'll be taking an in-depth look at whether we're currently in hyperinflation or a recession economy. Continue watching this video to the end to obtain a better understanding. Interest rates are rising, prices for basic necessities are holding steady high, the stock market suffered its worst first half in more than 50 years, and government assistance programs for those affected by the pandemic are being cut quicker. Many of the comments sound bites on debt and fiscal responsibility are inaccurate since home budgets and government budgets are quite different from one another. Even though that might be a little exaggerated, it's crucial to keep in mind that governments aren't magic. How can governments pay the price for living beyond their means if they don't manage their finances similarly to how we do? The answer to this query can reveal a lot about what lies ahead of us during the coming few months. Do we have no other option but to choose between inflation and a recession? Do we have to choose between a recession and unjustifiably high inflation? No, that's not the fantastic news you may expect it to be though. With an annualized rate of inflation being 8.6, the US is firmly positioned in what we would term excessive territory and at 3 to 4 times the Federal Reserve's goal rate. With a poor first quarter and most forecasts calling for a further slow quarter of growth, the growth itself has to be relatively sluggish. A recession is technically defined as 2 consecutive quarters of negative real GDP growth. There are other options besides choosing between high inflation and a recession, as the majority of institutions no longer use that rigid framework to determine whether or not we are in one. However, by the most reliable definition we currently have, we're likely already there in most economies around the world. They are all true. This is referred to as a stagflation by economists. The word stagflation was used first in the 1970s to characterize a period of sluggish economic development and high unemployment that yet managed to have high inflation because people won't spend as much money if they don't have jobs and are uncertain about the future. The Fed itself very swiftly points that, had these actions not been implemented, we would likely be facing deflation, which would have been worse for a number of reasons. 3% is actually not that bad. The 3% produced by the stimulus measures accounts for half if the target rate of inflation is 2 to 3% and we're currently at 8.5%. The actual calculations are much more complicated than this, and the Fed has acknowledged that this 3% figure is likely to be revised upward, but for now, it gives us a good benchmark to work from, and supply chain problems are undoubtedly a part of what is causing the additional 3% of above-average inflation that we're currently experiencing. There is no denying that over the past 2.5 years, the way we conduct business and add value to our economies has fundamentally changed. However, why are we only really experiencing this now that industrial output in the US has in fact increased to record highs and imports have surged to more than cover the supply shortages and then some? Supply chains played a significant role in the inflationary issue a few months ago, but there is now a little more to it. Of course, there are still some things like consumer electronics and oil that are troublesome, and a lot of these have had ripple effects. Nowadays, almost all of the food we eat travels hundreds or even thousands of miles before it reaches our doorstep. The expense of this transportation will eventually be passed on to us as consumers if oil is expensive. If we continue along this line of reasoning, we can begin to identify the true origin of the extra 3%. In a recent interview, Paul Donovan, the chief economist at UBS Global Wealth Management, wisely observed that only 15 to 20% of the money we spend on food is actually spent on food. The remaining 80% went into the logistics of delivering that food from the farm to our markets. Transportation costs, such as the fuel we discussed before, the items like packaging and processing, which have become slightly less efficient because of regulatory limits, make up the majority of this. The profit margins of all the businesses engaged in the supply chains as well as the wages of all the employees who made it possible are the 2 additional significant costs that we must take into consideration when we purchase our food. With all the talk of inflation, businesses have had a perfect excuse to raise their prices and claim to be simply keeping up with inflation. In truth, most businesses have raised their prices excessively, either out of concern for the continuation of inflation or more likely because they can. People won't be surprised if the price of their goods and services rises if they are anticipating a rise in the price level of such goods and services. Corporate earnings have reached historic levels over the past 6 months, despite the gradual tapering off of many fiscal stimulus measures, since these businesses now may charge whatever they truly want to. Labor costs will almost always make up the largest portion of this good expense pie, and Since both of those are increasing, workers have more negotiating power to demand higher salaries and are motivated to do so given all the talk of inflation. This is something that's genuinely happening right now. At the height of the pandemic, the chairman of our Reserve Bank in Australia declared that interest rates would not be raised until 2024. At a time when the recession was the greatest worry on people's minds, he said this to try and comfort them. But now, after 3 record rate increases, people won't take his statements as seriously any longer. Enjoying the video so far? Then go like, share and subscribe. Okay, what about the recession? It's possible that inflation is like Tinkerbell in that it only exists if people truly believe it does, but it doesn't make it any less of a problem. Most of what governments and reserve banks throughout the world undertake to combat inflation is the exact opposite of what they do to combat a recession. If an economy experiences excessive inflation, the central bank will raise interest rates and the government will increase taxes while reducing spending. When an economy is in recession, the central bank lowers interest rates and increases spending while lowering taxes. Therefore, what should be done when inflation is high and the economy is still headed for a recession? The real solution is a compromise of some sort. The primary goal of the Federal Reserve Bank is price stability, and while they typically strive to strike a balance between this and encouraging economic growth, if they find themselves in a tight spot, they may decide to maintain price levels even if doing so risks sending the economy into a recession. When you consider that these decisions will actually affect millions of everyday people worldwide, it can seem a little cruel, but that is simply part of their job. Even very severe recessions can be overcome, but recovering from hyperinflation is far more difficult. At this particular moment, we're already witnessing this. The Fed would never consider hiking interest rates given the world's issues, but they are now doing so due to inflation. The government's response will be somewhat different though, because in contrast to the federal government, they don't have a specific mission and instead exist for the benefit of the constituents they represent. The Federal Reserve's efforts to control inflation are unaffected by the White House, despite the fact that it concedes that doing so could hinder the economy's recovery. The White House has already said that fighting inflation is its top priority in terms of the economy. Instead, the government is attempting to implement fresh stimulus measures to lessen the consequences of both inflation and the probable recession. But wait, isn't the massive government stimulus effort at least partially to blame for our inflation problem? Yes, it is. However, these new stimulus measures vary in that they aim to boost the economy's supply of products and services rather than just the demand for them. It's not always the case that handing someone a $1,400 check will improve the economy. They can spend it to keep the economy afloat, sure, but if you do it frequently enough, inflation will become an issue. This new stimulus plan focuses on expanding infrastructure, unleashing oil reserves, and increasing home construction. These actions will all enhance the economy's supply of goods and services, which should hopefully simultaneously attenuate growing prices and provide some degree of economic stimulus. Regrettably, we are unable to escape either the recession or inflation. So how long will it take for our economies to recover? Who will actually be responsible for covering the cost of the unprecedented spending over the past 28 months? Let us know what you think in the comment section below. That's all for this video. Give it a like if you found it informative and share it with your friends. Subscribe to our channel as well to watch more such videos. See you in the next one.